How to prepare for long-term care. What is long-term care? What does it cost? What are the odds you're going to need long-term care for yourself or for a family member? Do your needs change for long-term care if you're married, single, divorced? How does Medicaid work? And finally, how can you prevent long-term care from derailing your finances? We'll answer these questions and dive in a bit deeper on this episode of Through the Pines. All right. Welcome to a financial planning podcast with a down-to-earth vibe. Sasquatch listens while charging his EV, which can sometimes take a while. This is Through the Pines, our financial wizards. This week from planwithbaxter.com, we have the one and only Rex.m.baxter, along with Brandon Smith in his nice, clean office. We got to buy you some more books, Brandon.
I
fill that
have a
back shelf
over here.
Yeah. All right. So on this episode, we will cover how to prepare for long-term care. By the way, you can like us. We do have a Facebook page, Through the Pines Facebook. Also follow us on Instagram at Pines_podcast. And if you're not already watching on YouTube, we do have a YouTube channel where you can see the wonderful, beautiful faces that is Through the Pines. That's our YouTube channel, Through the Pines podcast. First question, probably we need to get familiar with, what is long-term care? Rex, you want to tackle that?
Sure. Thanks first for having us on your podcast, Brandon. We always appreciate that. And so before we get to what is long-term care, how does Sasquatch charge an EV in the woods? I'm just curious.
He's got special, what are those really big, tall trees? The redwoods. The redwoods.
Sequoia?
So at the top of those sequoias, he's got like a little sun panel thing that collects the energy, and then it goes down and he charges his EV. And that's what he drives around town with. That's what I've heard. I'm just saying.
Sasquatch was doing it before it was cool.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. All right. So long-term care is the time in life when you're needing assistance, health assistance. And so, when we're talking about long-term care, we're talking about either in-home care, needing care in your home to help you, eat, bathe, get dressed, those kinds of things, basic needs, or we're needing to go into a care facility, a step, further than a retirement center or retirement community, to where people are checking in on you, they're making sure that you're eating and taking your medications, making sure that you're bathing and doing the things that you need to do. So when we're talking long-term care, that's what we're talking about, is caring during that stage of life.
Okay. That sounds expensive. And so how expensive is it? And how do you project those costs?
So it can be expensive, right? I'll let Brandon kind of go through, how you determine the costs and what that means. But there's lots of different ways to cover the expense. But just in general, if you're going to go into a care facility, there's different levels, whether it's a nursing home, a skilled nursing facility, a retirement center that doesn't have skilled nursing. So there's different kinds of facilities out there. And the range in cost will be somewhere between, in the state of Utah anyways, somewhere between about $3,500 to maybe about $8,000, depending upon whether you have your own room, whether it's a shared room, how nice of a facility it is, whether, they're cooking food to order, or whether you get 3 squares, in a cot. So,
yeah. I hope that's not the case. Brandon, these are monthly charges, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what's crazy is the care, there's so much variability in this that it makes it incredibly difficult to plan for every part of this, right? Because you might have your monthly cost, like Rex was saying, can range $3,500 to $8,000, but we've seen it, dramatically higher than that in certain circumstances as well. And then the care that you receive, there's a dramatic difference. You'll go into one facility and it smells terrible. People are angry. There's a really bad vibe going on, primarily due to lack of care and lack of, people to take care of others. And then other facilities you go in, and it feels like home. It's nice. You got people, going to different activities. You got, and so the cost per month is highly variable. The need is very different, right? You've got some people who just need some help with some basic, activities of life, maybe bathing and toileting. I mean, there's 6 of them, and we'll go into those in a little bit. But, you might have someone that just needs a little bit of help, but can still get around, can still go out and drive even. And so your cost depends on what your need is. And then finally, and probably the hardest part of all of this, is how many years does that cost go on, right? Oftentimes the average stay in a care facility is depends on who you talk to, and there are various numbers there, but it's usually about 1.5 to 3 years is your average stay in a care facility.
That's actually shorter than I thought it would be. So, but
yeah.
By the time you go to a care facility, that basically means you can't care for yourself, correct?
Yeah, and some of it's just, age demographic norms, right? So the current age demographic really is apprehensive about going into a facility, right? A lot of people want to stay at home, and does that change as social, our society's norms change? Maybe, maybe people say, I don't want to worry about a yard. I don't want to worry about, the difficulties of home ownership and having kids and grandkids come over. It just changes. And so, but beyond that, I mean, how many years does it go, right? Usually it's shorter, but man, you can have Alzheimer's and live a really long time in an extremely expensive environment. And so it makes, long-term care especially difficult to plan for, and something that, should be discussed.
Well, $8,000 a month, Rex, that'll drain your pocketbook pretty quick too. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
It can drain your pocketbook. That statistic of the average stay being about 1.5 years up to 3 years is typically when you're unable to do 3 or more of what the insurance industry considers your activities of daily living. And so, that can get extended. That 1.5 to 3 years can get extended significantly, like Brandon was saying, if you're in a memory care unit, right, due to dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, because you can still eat, you can still bake. You might not remember to, right? But you still are very, as far as able to do that. And those kinds of situations can go on, like Brandon said, for a decade or more. But $8,000, if you go into the high end, typically you're not going into a high end unless you have either significant insurance or a fair amount of wealth that you've kind of set aside and dedicated to cover for those expenses, because $8,000 a month is a lot.
Yeah.
And if you figure the average Social Security recipient is receiving somewhere between $2,000 to $2,500 a month in Social Security, and then on top of that either needs to be supplemented with either savings or pension or, funds or revenue from somewhere else, then that eats that up pretty quick on a monthly basis.
Rex, you and I are similar in age. Have you had any personal experience with a family member in long-term care?
I have, between grandparents. I have a mother-in-law that's in a care facility right now. And she can still do probably, 5 of the 6 activities of daily living that, again, we'll get into. We're kind of teasing that out here just a little bit, but she's still fairly functioning, but she needs help kind of dressing and bathing and assistance with some of those basic things. She's starting to have a little bit more difficulty transferring between a bed to a wheelchair or to a walker, which she doesn't use hardly at all anymore. And so I do, and we've had to shop around a little bit at different care facilities, and so I'm pretty familiar with Utah and our local market as far as costs and facilities. But there's also a lot of tools out there that we can utilize to look at facilities in other areas or costs in other areas. And so, again, a lot of our clients are spread throughout the entire nation, and so we get fairly used to looking at facilities all across the country. So
do people contact you for help with that?
So current clients rely on us for a lot of things, right? We always kind of joke that If it involves a dollar, we're involved in it one way or another. And
Sure.
certainly paying for long-term care involves a dollar, for sure.
Involves a lot of dollars. It's just that, you hear these funny stories about people calling 911 because, they can't decide what hamburger to buy or something. And so I'm wondering if it gets a little wild like that, where they're calling you and it's like they can't figure out basic purchases, and so they're calling you for that. Now, long-term care is a lot of money, so I guess that would make sense. But to be honest, I wouldn't have thought to contact an advisor first, even though it involves a dollar, because I would assume that's not what you study all day long.
So generally, we'll have the kids call us, right? And so the kids will be calling us and say, "Hey, we need to put mom or dad, or mom and dad, into a care facility. What things should we be looking at? Where can we evaluate them? What have you found to be kind of non-negotiables, if you will, in looking at care facilities?" Things like that. If it's actual, if it is mom or dad calling us, right, something like that, then they're asking different questions and saying, "Look, I'm 70 or 80 or whatever the age is, and I'm wanting to go into a retirement center now so that I can control the move, and I get to know a few people there now, so that as I age and as I start to go through this process, I'm already comfortable and my kids aren't having to worry about it. And so can you help me find a facility to where I can stay in the same, apartment, condo, whatever unit, and I can progress me from kind of retirement living, which can be activities, field trips, shopping, restaurants on site, all kinds of activities, all the way through kind of skilled nursing to where I'm needing, fairly constant check-ins from a registered nurse or from a doctor. And so those are the conversations lots of times we're having with some of our elderly clients.
Okay. I have in the notes here the impacts of a spouse and the retirement expenses. Brandon, you want to cover that?
Yeah, that is the main concern with long-term care. If you're single and the other, divorced, other spouses passed on, and you're just living in retirement, oftentimes you have a living expense, right? You're living on, it depends, right? $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $20,000 a month, whatever that range is. But even on the lower end, right? People are often living on at least $4,000 to $5,000 a month. If that's your living expense, and you're the only one you have to pay for, well, then we can just translate that over and go to a care facility, and retirement plans move on. And it's not nearly as, life altering or financially altering as you might worry. The concern comes, though, is when you have two spouses, right? And one spouse needs to go into a care facility and they start having a bill maybe at $6,000 a month, or even $5,000 a month. Meanwhile, the other spouse stays at home, and the expenses don't really change a lot. The spouse living at home doesn't turn the thermostat down because they're the only one there, right? They still drive the car to almost as many, different activities and destinations, if not more, if you're visiting, the other spouse. And so the real concern is that you have two spouses, one of them pulling $6,000 a month, the other one continuing the planned retirement expense. And then, eventually a spouse passes away that's in the care facility. You lose tax filing status, you lose the extra Social Security benefit. And that can, if you've drained the nest egg down, that can leave the surviving spouse in a really difficult position. And so that is the main concern. And getting around that is kind of at the focal point of all of this. Can we save extra if we're on the verge of going into a care facility? Is there a way that we can do that where we won't increase our expenses too much? Can we have friends or family help out? There's a whole list of things we can try to do to accommodate and work around that. But that's the concern: is how much extra are we going to pull on our retirement accounts, and for how long? And trying to understand and project that is kind of the key to the long-term care discussion.
So when determining the long-term care, there are the 6 activities of daily living. You have them listed here. I'll read them off, which include eating. So this would be like if you can't do this on your own. Eating, bathing, dressing, Some would say I can't dress myself, but that's another story. Transferring, so chair to bed, toileting, and then walking and moving. So if you're down, how many? 1, 2, any of those? How does it work?
Well, so obviously, if you're paying for the care, it's up to you. You can go and do whatever. I will say I looked at actually a few different lists. And it's funny, so many people and companies will say the 6 activities, but then they'll list slightly different activities. But all of them are pretty similar on that. And most insurance companies, it's 2, right? So if you can't do 2 of those things, some of them say 3, but most of them's 2, right? If you can eat, if you can bathe, but you need help, transferring or moving, or if you need help, it just, if you can't do 2 or 3 of those things, that's when the insurance policies that you can buy for these would start to pay out.
Okay, Brandon, you're an insurance guy. Talk to me about how can you protect yourself outside of a very large nest egg with insurance or disability insurance policies to help pay for long-term?
Yeah, I think the first point that you mentioned, disability insurance policies, oftentimes people will wonder, hey, will my disability policy through work cover this, or will my health insurance cover this? And the answer is no. Disability insurance, pays out if you're unable to work, and it covers, a percentage of your income. Health insurance covers, hospital bills and things like that. But once you're in a care facility, your health insurance isn't going to cover that. And so really what you're left to do is either one of a few things, right? We buy a traditional long-term care insurance policy. We buy a life insurance policy that has a long-term care rider on it. We self-insure, meaning we save up extra into 401ks, IRAs, non-qualified accounts, or wherever we want to save it. We build up some extra savings to pay for that. Or finally, we just kind of lean on family or friends to try and help us through that. And those are kind of the main options. It used to be about 10 years ago, there were actually quite a few insurance companies, that had really good products in the long-term care space. If you were worried about your future long-term care expense and you were relatively healthy, you could go out, pay a premium for that, and the company would take care of that for you. As the industry has shifted and as the question marks have grown as far as how much is future care going to cost, how long do people live down the road, insurance companies have gotten a little bit nervous about that risk that they're taking on. And so now we see policies that, relatively speaking, are fairly expensive. They often hold the right to increase your premium each year by as much as 25%.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah. And then finally they put caps now on the benefit, meaning, hey, we'll cover this amount, but once you hit this dollar amount of benefit paid out, we stop paying. And that's, that's difficult, because it really doesn't, it helps, right? But a lot of times when we run the numbers, it just doesn't make as much financial sense.
So who takes out the policy, and how old are they typically when they start thinking about this? The person that is going to end up in a long care facility, or the kids?
No, usually it's
out
the
on
person,
their parents,
right? I'm sure it's happened before where the kids are like, "Hey, we don't want any part of this," right? And they take that out. But usually it's the people that would be needing the care themselves. Oftentimes in the age bracket, you might say as young as 40, but usually 50 and 60s is when you're buying these policies. Because, man, life insurance can be a little bit hard to get approved for. Long-term care is even more difficult to get approved for, because you're more likely to need that early on than like a life insurance policy. Okay.
Rex, how much do you know about Medicare?
A little bit.
I had
a little bit about Medicare.
A friend of mine posted on Facebook because he's looking at Medicare options, I believe, for his mom. And I know nothing. So, because I just haven't looked at it at all, but I guess there's different plans. And so his question was, who specializes in this that I can ask so I know the differences between the plans? Are they that complicated, and do they make that big of a difference? And do any of them cover long-term care?
So yes, and no. So, so for those that can keep Brandon's questions all straight, because he's just rapid firing at me. Yes, they are that complicated. Yes, there are people that specialize in them that are typically Medicare health insurance specialists. And no, Medicare does not cover long-term care.
Okay.
And so there are a number of basic Medicare plans. You have an AB, you've got Medicare Part A, which is hospital insurance, Medicare Part B, which is doctors essentially, and healthcare coverage. And then you have parts C and D that cover, prescriptions, drug care, things like that are kind of the gap insurances. And then, there's about 6 basic plans. They just to make things confusing, because you have Medicare Part A and B, the 6 different plans are Plan A, Plan B, C, D, E, G, and so forth. And so you've got those plans to decide from, which all have kind of a different checklist that Medicare covers. And those are similar those are identical from company to company, but they can add on to the basic coverages. And then you have what's called Medicare Advantage plans that kind of combine all of the B, C, and D into a combined plan, which have become a lot more popular over the last few years, because some of them will cover dental, some won't, some will cover vision, some won't, things like that. And so you can kind of cherry pick from year to year as to what kind of coverage you need. Thank goodness this is not a Medicare podcast today. And
well, as exciting as that would be, no.
Yeah.
So how does it? You can't use any funds at all from it for long term.
Yeah. So Medicare doesn't cover long term care insurance, right? Medicaid, not to be confused with Medicare.
Okay.
Medicaid will cover a base level of long-term care insurance. However, in order to qualify for Medicaid, you can't have more than roughly $2,000 in assets to your name.
Wow.
And your income, for the most part, that's dedicated towards you, again, needs to go towards that care. Medicaid can be a little bit restrictive. I know a number of people that are have had to use Medicaid for their parents. And unfortunately, you're looking at sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 people per room, kind of shared rooms. And if you can imagine having 5 elderly in one room trying to decide between Jeopardy or The Price is Right or different things like that on one TV.
Oh, yeah.
That may not be the quality of life that you're looking for.
Yeah, and that's the least thing. I mean, they're going to argue about. That's going to be a mess. I think that's tough.
So we really try and avoid that, right? With most of our clients, as far as savings or transferring the risk to an insurance company, whether it be a long-term care policy or a life insurance policy with a rider, with a long-term care rider on it. We'll do a separate podcast at some point on Medicare and bring on a Medicare specialist, because I think that is a big issue to our audience. So
the flip side to bunking with multiple elderly people would be you've got plenty of friends. You have new friends now, which is nice. Someone to talk to.
Hope you like them. I hope you don't remember.
Yeah,
right? One or the other.
So. Brandon, you have some more numbers?
I do. Yeah. Before we get to that, one other quick thing on some people will try and because there's a look back too, right? People will say, well, okay, I can only have $2,500 to my name. I'll just give it all to my kids, jump on Medicaid, right, and run through it. And obviously there's a look back on that. And so they look back 5 years to see if you've had assets. If you have, then obviously that, you don't qualify for that.
That is not a lot of, that's not a lot of money.
Yeah. You basically have to be completely, out, financially.
Right. Okay.
And it's good, right? That's a safety net that picks up so that we don't have elderly people on the street if they can't afford it. Right. But it's definitely not, it's not as much of a fallback as a lot of people think it is, where people think, hey, I'll just jump on Medicaid if I need it, for long-term care. And it's like, well, you can, but basically your entire state needs to be done. I have seen people literally gift their entire state out. So move it to an irrevocable trust, move everything out, and in order to wait that 5 years, and then you can. But then the difficulty with that is you're right back on a Medicaid plan, right? Do you want to be in a Medicaid facility, like a facility that's approved by Medicaid? And usually the answer is no. It's a nice thing to do if you're, doing that for your kids, I guess, to give them some of an inheritance. But it is a lot of estate work, and you literally have to give all of your assets away. you can't hold on to those. You can't keep or control those. You have to move that out of your estate. And so, anyway,
just 5 years is a long
if you
time.
do that wrong, it's Medicare fraud, right? Medicaid fraud, which is a significant issue. And the government does penalize that to the fullest extent. And on top of that, they'll end up either clawing it back, or they make you pay out of pocket now that you've given everything away, until that amount has been essentially spent down. And so there's a lot of planning that goes around that. We know a lot of estate attorneys that kind of work on asset protection trusts and working on trying to get the assets out of the estate, putting them in irrevocable trusts, and trying to make sure that it's out of the estate and out of their ownership prior to that 5 years or 7 years or whatever the case may be. But it is a fairly complex issue where you probably want multiple professionals looking at that scenario for you if that's the path that you're headed down.
Okay, Brandon, some more numbers.
Yeah. So Nationwide did a survey study, and they looked and they said that the average retirement age has grown from 65.4 to 63.8. So almost three full years between, and that's the average retirement age, almost 3 full years. And that's happened between January of 21 and August of 2022. So August of last year. I thought that was kind of an interesting statistic. At face value would be startling, right? That holy cow, in a short, year and a half, people have all on average pushed back retirement age by 3 years. The reality is, I think that has a lot more to do with the cyclical place that we're in with the economy. As the economy, as people get nervous about things happening, which there's a lot, if you look at the consumer confidence index, there's plenty of uncertainty out there. And so oftentimes, and we see it with clients as well, people will say, yeah, I can retire, sure, but man, work's not so bad. And what if what if things get worse? I'll just keep working, because it's a lot easier to keep working than to retire, go away, and then decide I need to come back in a year or two.
Well,
and so anyway,
they got to keep saving so they can put mom in long-term care. They got to keep working. But Rex, what's the best strategy to build a big enough nest egg so that you can pay for the best long-term care for your loved one?
I think it's starting early, right? Just like most of our podcasts, we talked about saving early and starting early and spending less than what you make and those basic needs. But I do think that planning for that and saying, look, not only am I going to have my retirement expenses, which again is made up typically of Social Security and possibly a pension or a 401k, and maybe you've got some rental income, maybe you don't, or you're selling a business to generate some of that other income. But then to plan for that and say, yeah, but realistically, I may, when I hit 85, I may need a long-term care facility for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. And here is the present value of that future cost. And so here's how much I need to be saving today in order to increase my nest egg so that I can self-insure. And that is what the majority of our clients do. The majority of our clients will self-insure for their long-term care needs. That can be difficult to do if it is an extended, mental illness or memory care kind of situation. Then that can be a lot. And so in those situations, lots of times we are taking and utilizing insurance to transfer that risk. But, to answer your question, how do we do that with our clients is we plan for it, right? As we wrap that cost into our projections and we wrap that expense in to make sure that we're saving the right amount and that we have that saved up so that we can draw upon it when we need it most.
Just in addition to that, long-term care isn't the only risk you face as you enter retirement in your 60s. There's a few big ones, right? Long-term care is one of them, but another one's premature death, right? That first decade of retirement is somewhat dangerous, right? If one spouse predeceases the other by a lot, right? Both turn 65 and one spouse passes away, it's not impossible, but that's really hard because, like I mentioned earlier, you lose that tax filing status of married filing jointly, and you lose a Social Security benefit. And so, yes, the continuing spouse will still take one of the higher of the two benefits going forward, but man, to lose one is usually, means $1,000-$2,000, sometimes $3,000 a month. And so there are a few risks going into retirement, in addition to, market performance, recessions. I mean, there's various things. And so, rarely do we ever do a financial plan that is, just going to squeak by if all the optimal cases present themselves. Now, the better way to do it is to have a financial plan that has some cushion, knowing that more likely than not, we're going to see one or two or three headwinds, right? We're going to see some unknown, but you build a plan that has the flexibility to get around those unknowns. And yeah, sometimes we do accept risk, depending on what clients want. Sometimes like, hey, look, I really need more. I want more lifestyle today. I'm willing to accept that we could get in a little bit of a tighter pinch later, if all the cards align poorly, and we can move forward with that. But it's our job to help people kind of plan and anticipate how do we make sure we're moving into retirement with a high probability of success.
Brandon, have you run the numbers on what is the probability, speaking of us ending up in a long-term care? Are we all going to be there together? Brandon's too young. Rex and I will hang out in the same place, but yeah, what's the percentages of how many people tend to stay home for as long as they can and live there and pass quietly in their bedroom at night, and then how many end up in a care facility?
It's hard to say exactly. I know people have done different studies. I saw one number that said, if you're 65, you have a 70% probability of needing long-term care.
Wow.
But like what does that mean? Two of the six things. Oftentimes people get that long-term care from a family member, right? They won't go into a facility. And Rex, I don't know if you've seen it. I haven't seen a number on what your percent is to a care facility. It's hard to say. Even if we had that number, though, it's largely driven by financial ability, right? And so many people need the care, but just can't afford to go into a facility, and so we'll have kids or spouses, take care of them. And so I don't know that there's really good data on that, but I don't know. Rex, do you have a better answer?
I've seen a lot of studies too, but I always look at them with a little bit of a skeptical eye because most of the studies are commissioned by insurance companies. So that might sound terrible.
Are they skewed a little? Oh.
We hope
you have
not.
a 100% chance of needing this insurance. Yeah.
So
Weird.
We hope not. I do know that, for a lot of people in the United States, that most people expect their family to care for them, and most people want to pass away in their home, right? And they don't want to be a burden to their kids on the one hand, but on the other hand, they also don't want to move out of their homes, and so they really get torn into this, decision of what do I want to do, and I think one of the things that we don't spend enough time talking about is the stress of having to care for somebody in their own home that needs long-term care as a family member or as a spouse. And I have seen studies on this to where it does shorten the lifespan of the caregiver that's caring for that person due to that increased stress that they're putting on their own life, and them essentially taking a gap from spending time with their kids, spending vacation, working as much as maybe they would otherwise, socializing with people their own age, as opposed to now spending it in and out of duty with their mom or dad or both in their home, having to do those, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 activities of daily living for, with their parents. And so I am a big fan of utilizing the facilities that are out there, and as they continue to get better and better, and they continue to provide more and more, services for the elderly, they're not like the care centers of 2 generations ago of kind of the Great Depression, where literally it was a nursing home that, that has that medical smell, and you go in and you just walk in and it feels like death, Yeah. And that's not the case anymore. And yet a lot of people still have that image or impression, and it's just not. And so I encourage that as parents are getting closer to that stage, that the kids take them there and explore and go and eat lunch at those facilities and kind of explore the different kind of facilities. And instead of keeping this one of those taboo topics that we don't talk about, throw it on the table. It's a fact of life. It's something that we're all going to face. And let's just explore what, how do we want to be cared for and what's going to work for all the family members involved.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you the home option is stressful. We're going through that right now. And taking care of someone in the home is, and we've got two on the job right now. And that's even stressful because then it's the communication between the two. And well, I could totally see how that would shorten the lifespan of the poor caretaker, and so consider there's a lot of things to consider with long-term care. It's expensive. How do you save for it? The odds are pretty good you may end up in one. Also, things change a lot depending on if you're married or if your spouse dies, which is interesting. We covered Medicare and Medicaid as well. Anything else?
I don't think so. I think it's one of those things that we do. We are prepared to have those discussions with you, with our clients and with those in the public. It's something that we do address regularly and that we're familiar with. I think looking at transferring the risk, insurance policies come and go with their attractiveness or unattractiveness. But I think looking at all the options and understanding what the pricing of all the options is part of doing your due diligence. Just as much a part of doing your due diligence is going out and looking at the actual facilities and seeing what those costs are for the care provided and seeing which, price point you're comfortable with as a family. So plan with Baxter, give us a contact and let us know what your questions are.
Awesome. Thanks, Rex. Again, you can follow us on our Facebook page at Through the Pines Facebook. Instagram is at Pines_podcast. And if you are not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. It is Through the Pines Podcast. This has been Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.